So how do you earn a seat at the decision-making table? Our guest today is Jenny Mitchell. She is based in Ottawa, Canada. So another fellow Canadian. I'm excited to have her here. She is the Chief Visionary Officer at Chavender.com, and she is the author of Embracing Ambition and the host of the Underdog Leadership Podcast. So go check that out if you're interested in learning more about what she's up to there. That's a great place to do that. She is committed to nurturing the next generation of leaders, and she works very closely with not-for-profit leaders to change the world one mission at a time. And so we're going to talk about a few different topics here. Her book, Embracing Ambition, and it's a wonderful book with stories of women who have overcome adversity and gotten a seat at the table. And we're also going to talk about fundraising because she's a fundraising professional, and lots of good things to come here. So Jenny, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation. We're glad you're here.
Oh, thanks for having me, and delighted to open up this conversation.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, let's do a shout out to Smith Publicity. Thank you for the introduction, because you know what? This podcast, like this podcast would not be what it is without all of the amazing booking agents and friends and past guests that send me amazing guests. And certainly we can't interview everyone on this show, but every once in a while we get to do that. And thank you to them.
Yeah, thank you to them. And I'm going to throw a question back to you, Nicole, right away. What was it about what we put out or proposed to you that really resonated with you? Because I think that might be a great anchor point for our conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Great point. Thanks for turning that around. You're a good host. She's got her own podcast. Can you tell? Well, so the reason why was because of the approach that you were taking to women in your book, and they're getting a seat at the table, not from a position which some do, a lot do, unfortunately, is that victim, but it's really more from an empowerment standpoint, from a standpoint of what do you need to do in the world that we live in to get a seat at the table, to have your voice heard. And it kind of goes for women, and it also goes for men. Yep. And so I liked the approach that you had there. And of course, then the fundraising as well. We do have nonprofits that are listening, leaders that are listening and saying, how do I raise funds for the projects that are near and dear to my heart? And so, getting that information, insight from you as somebody who has a lot of experience in the area, I think is going to be good.
So I love that, because I think what I pull out of there, and I know I'm going to guess that your first question is going to be about leadership. And so I'm just going to take us there if you don't mind. Yeah. And what I want to pick up out of there is, I'm not so interested in the adversity or the obstacle, but I get very interested in how you overcame it, what you learned, and where you're going with that knowledge.
Yes.
And so that, I think, is, to me, one of the tenets of the future leadership that we need more of. And so when people ask me, tell me about your leadership style, or tell me what's most important to you, there are so many leadership coaches. Let's just say that there are so many people with their own proprietary XYZs. Who I want to be a beacon for is the people who have, my podcast is called Underdog Leadership. And some people go, ooh, underdog, I'm not sure. And I say, well, hold on a minute. Have you ever had an experience where you were the most unlikely candidate? You were the one that was least disposed to get that role, and you had to overcome something within you, to be seen differently, or to be perceived differently, or to show up with your strengths. You haven't changed, Nicole. I just want to be clear. We're not talking about changing who you are. We're talking about picking and choosing the pieces of you that you bring forward to get that leadership position, because once you are there, you can make the change happen for all those other sidelined, maligned, challenged people that might have not be the typical subjects for leadership. That's what I want to talk about.
Love it. I love it. So why is this such a passion for you? Where did this start for you?
It's a great question. So, I think I can go back to the world when I was little. I remember sitting in the backseat of a car, looking out the window and having two thoughts at the same time. Green, ugly green. Remember those olive green, really wide, no seatbelts, no nothing, Nicole.
Yeah.
you're looking at the window and you see these cars going by and you think, wow, the world is a really, really big place. I didn't know it was that big. And two, will I have time to meet them all? Like a very people-centered approach, very focused on people, but realizing very quickly that the world makes it very hard for us. High school is not a pleasant place for anybody. And I remember feeling very isolated and very lonely and very different. Now, the irony is that I've come back to that place and talked to other colleagues, and everybody felt different. Like, I don't know anybody who felt perfectly normal and, in high school. And so I feel like we've been sold this bill of goods about the way the world is supposed to be. Maybe that place of feeling uncomfortable is the place we need to get comfortable in so that we can grow into the next phase of ourselves. So I resonate with the underdog. I resonate with the person that has struggled to learn how to use their voice. Good Canadians, we don't like conflict. Good girl, stay in your lane. Don't be too bossy. Don't make too much noise. Definitely resonate with that, Nicole. And I've found my own way through it that's worked for me. And I continue to learn from others about how they do it. And I'd love to hear how you've done that over the years too.
It's interesting because you right out of the gate, you're, for very people centered and focused on that. And that just says so much about who you are and what's important to you. For me, I was like the doer. I was the loner, and I was a bit of an outsider, even though I could get along with everyone. I was kind of the outside observer watching what was happening. And I remember being very introverted, actually, and shy. Like literally being 3 years old, my mom saying, somebody saying, what's wrong with her? It's like, oh, because I was hiding behind her and said, oh, she's just shy. And I remember that. And I owned that. And so when I got into business, when I was in my teens, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be in business for myself. I want to, my parents were entrepreneurs already. And so I was kind of in that environment. I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to have freedom and all those things. It occurred to me that I was going to have to talk to some people because it was not going to work otherwise. And so that's when I started getting out of my shell and starting to articulate, communicate. And it was kind of messy in the beginning. And then it was, I was 16 years old, right? I'm trying to sell fax machines door to door, right? In Markham, Ontario, and, in the industrial areas. And it was like, oh, honey, that's so cute. That's cute. Right.
Oh, man.
$2,500 fax machines back in the day. That's 1988. And so who's going to give a 16-year-old $2,500? Right. And trust that she's going to bring back a fax machine in a week. So it was tough. And then I started selling, different things. I realized very quickly I wasn't interested in fax machines, but it was the only thing I could find that I had gotten a line on wholesale. I could buy retail. Buy wholesale and sell retail and make a profit. And as I continued on, I realized very quickly that I could complain about how it was, or I could say, how am I going to show up so that they're going to listen to me? I got more propositions for dinner and dates than I did sales in the beginning. And I was like, okay, so how do I get them to listen to me and take me seriously? Yeah. What do I need to change in me to do that? And that was, and that was very empowering for me because over time, they started to listen. Yep. Maybe they looked at me and went, oh, she's young, right? Now she's 20, now she's 24, 25, 26. But then I'd open my mouth and they're like, oh, dang, she knows a few things. And that's how I earned the seat at the table. Right. And so that's why this is so important, because I think so many of us, and yes, I am Canadian and polite. I am also very driven and results, oriented. And so I was like, how do we get the result? Right. Yep. So very tenacious, as one of my mentors says. My middle name is tenacity. And so, I think that there's a lot of women that we wait, and men, both, for sure, that we wait for somebody to open the door for us. We wait for that person to give us the opportunity. They're not giving me the opportunity. And it's like, well, if I would wait for the opportunity, I'd still be waiting. Yeah.
And when you're pushing through that boundary, that political piece in you, it'll feel very uncomfortable. You may feel like you're holding your breath. You may feel like there's a tight knot in your stomach. But those are signals from your body. Your body wants to keep you safe. Yeah. And one of the things I always say to my clients is, that it's okay to say, thank you very much. That little voice, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And here's something you picked up on, and I'm going to phrase a different way. The obstacle is the way.
That's right.
So many of us hit the obstacle and run away. And I do worry about our next generations with this. We could have a sidebar about that one, because adversity is important. Not adversity that breaks you down and gives you a mental health challenge, but adversity where you have to change the way you're doing things in order to get to where you want to go.
Yes.
And so taking a hard look at that obstacle, I can imagine you at 23 going, okay, it seems to me, if I do a quick analysis, I'm doing better with this profile. I get in when I have something that's only 2 minutes long, like that analysis on the moment and adjusting. And I would call this testing or trying things out is so powerful versus hurt, shame, embarrassment, which really cuts you off at the knees, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Adversity and obstacles is how we grow. If you want to build muscle and you go to the gym and all you do is, 3-pound weights and that's all, it'll get you to that. If you've never lifted 3 pounds, okay, there's maybe a little bit of resistance there, or you're a kid and one thing, but once you get to the point where you are growing and that you need more, right? Yeah. Like the reward for overcoming one challenge is another challenge in another opportunity. And you can see it as an obstacle, or you can see it as an opportunity. I saw it as an opportunity. And yes, at some point I looked at it and said, it's interesting because I had what was my obstacle became my opportunity.
That's right.
Because now I've got, you got a 25-year-old girl who's coming in and she knows her stuff. And it's like, dang, okay. I started getting job offers.
Yeah.
People are like, I need you on my team.
Yeah. And you stand out.
You stand out. So the very thing that could have stopped me is the very thing that became my advantage later on.
I love that. Yeah. So think about leadership. When you asked me that question earlier, I think there's an element to leadership of, okay, we all know know yourself, self-awareness, blah, blah, blah. But it's more than that. It's accepting the fact that you are, and I love this quote, a spiritual being having a human experience.
Yes.
Right. And so if you trust in your own energy and if you can slightly distance yourself from what's happening to you, like
step out.
Yeah, mm-hmm. That like 1 second pause between the action, what happens and how you react. To me, that it really is self-leadership, which is the most important component of any kind of other leadership. And it just when you think you've got it, it's very nebulous. It moves again, Nicole, because it is a continuous learning journey. And I would say the word is deepening into rather than expansion of. It's yes and.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us about your book, Embracing Ambition. How did that come to be?
Yeah. So very simply, I was an academic. I have many, many degrees. My former life, I was a classical musician and I had written a dissertation. So I had a doctorate degree. So I knew I could write. And as an academic, the highlight of your world is writing a book. It's the ultimate, Mount Everest. And every time I started thinking about writing this book, I thought, me by myself? Writing about me? Boring, like truly, right? Because as we said, I am a people person. I like right away, even in this interview, I want to have a dialogue. I want to know what you think. Yeah. I want to create together. So this is where I said, what if I had heard the research by Dr. Megan Rabine, who has wrote her paper on these 5 pillars that are outlined in the book, the 5 pillars that women will experience in their journey to the C-suite. And I thought, what if I could marry the research with my love of people and these first person stories? If I could inspire 12 women to come on this journey with me and write not the official version, right? But what it felt like to lead as a woman version, and invite them to be transparent, vulnerable, and share their story as an arc. And then I took those stories, those 12 stories, and fit them into the pillars. So what you find in the book, Nicole, and to all of our listeners, is a description of the pillar. So what the experience is based on the research. And then you get these beautiful colored stories about what it feels like to lead. And then at the end, there's some reflection questions. So that idea that when you interact with the information and you discuss it with girlfriends and you have these conversations, it doesn't have the same power over you that it did before. So that's how the book came to be. We wrote it on a weekend in Toronto together, which is also very unique. So let me explain that we all learned about storytelling. We had a fantastic editor that walked us through. But when we arrived Saturday, we had kernels of ideas. We workshopped with each other, because we had a million stories, right? Anybody in leadership has stories, but which one would feel the most authentic and organic? We workshopped them. And then by Sunday, when we left, we had the story mapped out. We may not have had it written. And then we supported each other through that journey. And I think that has been the most powerful part of this book. This is more than just a book. To me, this is like a way of operating in the world. And I think that the way it was done could be applied to so many other institutions and organizations, entrepreneurs. I think they could bring this example to their teams. It's a framework that has a lot of flexibility to it. And you learn so much more about people when you do it this way than I was born in 1972 and my parents were from here. And, that sort of litany of check boxes.
Yeah.
If you will.
Yeah. Well, I was actually born in 1972, but
me too. Just saying.
Oh, really? So we're the same age. That's funny.
Figured.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, and I loved that. And I loved the diversity in the book as well. Women talking about their different experiences, different perspectives on what it meant for them to embrace ambition, to be willing to say, hey, this is what I've always dreamed of doing, being the underdog. Some of the stories, like I think of the one lady who was from Nigeria, and how somebody, I keep that stuck, it gets stuck in my brain. Somebody said to her, how do you like it here? And she's like, what? Because she thought she was a refugee. And she's like, I'm Canadian. And I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
And it's like, we all have, it's hard for you and I maybe to relate to that experience, but as I said, you when you look and you step into somebody else's shoes,
yes,
and you start to see that what their experience has been, that's not to make them a victim though, is to just recognize, wow, we have such a narrow view. And how can we expand our view and see the value and see even beyond that, even see how we're showing up for others and in others' lives, how we're perceived in other people's lives, people who have good intentions, people that are looking to be successful in life and make a difference and bring value and so forth. How are we showing up for them?
Yeah.
And that just really struck out for me, kind of like being on the opposite side of these stories and saying, wow, like,
well, of course.
How can I ensure that I'm not that person, that I'm the person that's empowering them?
Yeah. And that was, her name was Onome. She's the first story in the book. And one of the things that she said to me there were many things that she said that really stuck with me. One was, I never thought of myself as Black until I came to Canada. So interesting, because we define her that way. And just for all of our listeners, I'm not a DEI specialist. I hope I'm working hard to be a better ally. And this book has sort of prompted me to think about some things. But, we often make assumptions that are not really grounded in any fact or truth. We just do these things, and we must be mindful of that. I think the most important part is just to ask ourselves, just check ourselves. You going up to the person and saying, the story she talked about was somebody always mistaking her for the waiter. Oh my gosh, Nicole, right? Or the one where she gets announced, congratulations, you've this new role, our BIPOC CEO. And it's like, you take away all of her sovereignty, all of her work, by labeling her as such, that she's only BIPOC. And the last thing I'll say is that understanding what they symbolize to their communities. When she's making decisions, she represents all women of color when she's making those choices. So if she succeeds, great. But if she fails, everybody's watching. And so I'm learning more and more. We talk about women and men and how, we men make assumptions, I think, sometimes about us. I also think that we are learning how to be more open with our perceptions of leadership. Women tend to be more collaborative. They tend to ask for more feedback. That does not have to be a lack of strength or a lack of confidence. But if you've never seen it happen that way before, Nicole, if you've never seen a truly collaborative leader, you can say, oh my God, she doesn't know what she's doing, right? So taking that time to soften that yoke of leadership. I'm not asking you to be less clear. I'm not asking women to be less decisive. That's not my point. But we can have different influences, and we need masculine and feminine. We can't survive with just go, go, go. And we can't survive just with sort of that warm, compassionate. We need, actually, in an ideal world, we need both, and we need them to coexist.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not the either or. It's not the either or. And, recently I was talking to somebody about this feminine energy, masculine energy, and we all have both. And it's how we use that in the balance. And he was talking about the value of the feminine energy, being that container, and being the one that kind of creates that container for the masculine drive, in that. And I thought that 100%. Was a really great example. And you know what, I guess I'm from Canada, I'm from Toronto. So Toronto is very multicultural, and it has always baffled me that we make, and that's, I'll say that, and then we can move on to other things. But it's always baffled me how we judge somebody by the cover of them, like the color of their skin. Mm-hmm. Coming from Toronto and actually moving to LA, I was actually quite shocked at how much prejudice and racism was actually going on. And I don't mean that, again, from a victim standpoint. It was an observation, and it actually was me being the other side because of where we moved to. And I went, everybody's looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? What am I doing here? And so it's something that we get to work on. And as leaders, we get to, look at how can we empower people? How can we create environments for them to thrive and for the best version of them to show up? How do we do that? And not allow our biases and our assumptions to get in the way of that.
Yeah. Sandboxes. What does your sandbox look like? Who's in your sandbox? How do we treat the people in your sandbox? I love this discussion. And just to tie it back to the book, ambition means different things to different women. That's another thing I want to highlight is that, this masculine word ambition, we're kind of reclaiming it with this title, embracing ambition. And it's intentional, right? Embracing warms it up. It softens it. So many people have mentioned the title to me, and granted, I workshop this thing, Nicole. Like I did test groups, I did marketing, fascinating what people like and what people don't like in titles. And I wanted it to be that idea of we can reclaim it for what we want. It doesn't have to be the CEO of XYZ, but if that's what you desire, then let's build you a path to get there. But being ambitious for your own sake, instead of for your race's sake, for your society's sake, for your parents' sake, for your kids' sake. I mean, to truly internalize that. And, as a professional coach and something I do a lot of the time, we're often triggered by external stuff, the medals and the validation and the awards and the accolades. But that intrinsic motivation, when you tap into it and you want to do it because you're genuinely curious and you genuinely have a passion for something, it's a game changer because suddenly you find the energy and the flow to make it all happen. And that's what I'd like more of from everybody because, the AI is going to change a lot of things. But what it's not going to change is human interaction, human connection, all of those mirror neurons that you and I are having a heyday with right now on Zoom because we're connecting over something that's meaningful. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. So we might as well get really comfy being humans with all the joys and the pitfalls that comes with.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about, I want to shift gears, and I promised that we would talk about fundraising.
Woo.
And I think this is it seems like a segue, and yet at the same time, again, we're talking about environments. We're talking about, okay, so we have charities that have missions that they want to put forth. They got the same challenge, perception, right? How do you connect to your audience, the right people? How do you even, I know we were talking about what's the difference between fundraising and capital funding. Why do people not repeatedly donate? They might donate once, but they don't come back. So again, this is all perception. This is all like, where do we start with that? Like if, let's say somebody's out there and they have a charity or they have some kind of initiative, even if it's not a formal, charity, or it's a church or whatever. And they're saying, we've got a heart for this, right? We want to make this happen. This ambition that we have. There's actually a book out there called Holy Ambition. The ambition's not bad, right? It's like holy ambition. It's like, what is that thing that you say, this is what I'm called to do. This is what the injustice that I want to solve, the gap that I want to fill. And they need some funds to be able to do that. So where do they begin?
Yeah. And, there is a lot of parallels between fund development and raising capital for entrepreneurs. So for your entrepreneur listeners, I'd love for you to think about how this relates to your world as you're raising capital. It always starts with an idea, a vision of how the world's better. Or in your case, like you mentioned, an injustice, something that's wrong that you feel that you can address or fix. Or, maybe it's not even fix. Maybe it's shift or
transform.
Transform. Thank you. Well, yeah, great line.
There you go.
There you go. Transform. So I think what we do a lot of, as soon as money comes into play, a lot of people get really weird because it's taboo. There's beliefs in there. There's how you were raised around your kitchen table. Fun fact. If you're ever looking for a very engaging dinner party, invite two other couple friends, if you have a partner, and ask them what they learned about money around the kitchen table when they were kids. Because you think you know these people, and then when you hear those deep, deep rooted values, it's fascinating what comes up. So money is fundamental. And so that's part A. I think a lot of the time, we think of charity as a less than, and it really inhibits us when we're out there asking for a cause. So the old version of charity was the tin cup mentality. Please give us money, right?
Yeah.
For us, Salvation Army, using an example that's in Canada and the States, they worked very hard on moving from a tin cup mentality to a leg up rather than a handout. And so you are going to have to cast a vision and inspire people what will be different when they make that gift. And sometimes I find people fixate on the amount or the thing, not the bigger vision of what's going on. So let me give an example. You want to, so that every woman in California can have access. Right now, we're talking a lot about menstrual products and all those kinds of things. What values, what beliefs does the person that you're talking to hold about that subject? So you may not go in with menstrual products, but you may go in with, how do you feel about humans? How do you feel about equality and dignity? Tell me more about your experiences as a person growing up in your community, So finding that equity, equality, and aligning the beliefs, Nicole, before you move into the money part, because a lot of the time we move quickly to the money and it ends up with sort of a bit of a, what's the word? A bit of a catalyst, because people tend to not like when, Nicole, I have this great idea. I know that you should come with me. It's going to be fantastic. I've got it all mapped out. I just need your money.
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to do that. It's like sales, right? You have to bring them along the journey. So that's part A. I think having the right people on the team is another important. So the case, what we would use, the language, why are we doing this? What's important? Okay. Who's on the team? I think it's important to think carefully and thoughtfully and bring people along. Volunteers and emotional enthusiasm is going to matter a lot. So you cannot push boulders up a hill without the right people pushing those boulders. Yeah. And then I think the piece that most people miss is the celebration and the community piece. I think we often sort of collapse in a heap after the event and we don't actually get the chance to do the human work of connecting and thanking and all those good things. So those are like my high level examples. I would finally close with, charity, and people are not going to like to hear this, but charity is a business. It has inputs and outputs. It has revenue. It has expenses. Unfortunately, the charitable world lives under the shadow of overhead costs and the shadow of how much does their CEO get paid and the shadow that we're doing, and for your community, God's work, and that we shouldn't get paid a lot, that we shouldn't have needs and all those good stuff. I say bull caca. I say, forget it. I say, don't ask what things are costing at the charity. I ask, ask what the return on investment is like. When you make an investment in fund development and in marketing, those are the two places you should expect a return on the other side. And so for my business folks that are sitting on boards, because I'm sure lots of them out there are experiencing this right now, rather than spending all that time on the expense sheet and cutting things back, how can you look at the revenue and say, what's my part in this? How can I amplify this voice? How can I make better introductions and community to get this message of this mission out to more people? And overhead and cost to raise a dollar are one important metric, but they are not the be all and the end all, Nicole. I'll hold it there. Do you hear my passion? I hope.
Well, and I love that you just, as you unpack that, you just laid out the formula or the plan for that. And, I wrote down this like why, who, and then the celebration, right? Of that. And I think that's so important. Celebrating all wins. I learned that from one of my mentors, is celebrating all the wins, because otherwise we just keep going on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And in spiritually, you mentioned about earlier, it's like spiritually, our spirit goes like, why do I don't do this?
Yeah.
I never get rewarded. It's just same old, same old. My reward is more work.
I know.
Next thing. And so I think that's really important. And when you said about starting with the why, I'm doing this exciting thing. I think about somebody who reached out to me on Facebook, and I've had lots of people, I'm sure you have too, that reach out and ask for money, but it's like, well, I'm doing this thing and you should support me in it.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. So not that it's not a good thing to do, but it's not necessarily where my priority is right now. It's not to say that I'm not donating and supporting things. It's just, I'm deciding, and so people can, feel bad or make you feel bad because you're not supporting that thing, because they are so passionate about it. And it is meaningful, and it's a yes. And I look at it and say, okay, when I say yes to this, I'm also saying no to all these other things. Yeah. And so what am I saying yes to? And what am I choosing to say no to? Or what do and like, to me, it's like, I feel like there's a sense of calling, right? It's like, I feel called, I check in. It's like, am I supposed to do that? Or am I not? Sometimes it sounds unreasonable. It's like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm supporting this.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the passion blindness, because you just described it so well. When you're so pumped about something and you think you've got the best, and I would say our capital folks, our venture capitalists are the same, right?
Same thing. Entrepreneurs are guilty of this.
Blind to all the pitfalls, right? And sort of nobody wants to be convinced to give money.
Yeah.
People want to come along with you on the journey.
Yeah.
And so the language and the way you set it up, and make no bones about it, what's in it for me? That is part of the story. I mean, obviously, venture capital is what's in it for me as a return on investment. But even if it's a charitable thing, they can give to a million different places. So how are you setting yourself up to align with what they already believe is a yes and, right?
Yes.
And show them that they can make that difference through your organization. So this is an egoless experience. There's not a lot of ego in fund development, in my experience. It's much more about a partnership. It's so much more about listening. People think that fundraisers are snake oil, they convince people of things. That's not it at all. I'm always surprised. We do a heck of a lot of listening. We do a lot of alignment check-in, and we're not looking for money. We're looking for fit. And people don't spend the time doing that, unfortunately. There are a whole bunch of other components. Brand comes in, are they trustworthy? We talk about hygiene issues in my world. So, if before Nicole's going to give me money, it's just to know that I'm trustworthy, it's just to know that financially I'm going to be stable. Please, 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 no deficit financing. Nobody wants to give money to a charity to pull it out of a hole. We are always forward thinking. So why now? Why me? Why are you talking to me? What is it about me? And then I think what's changed. So for a lot of folks, you're going to have to, if you're inviting someone to make a big investment for transformational mission shift, you better be able to tell me why you're asking for it now. Well, it's because, music in the schools is no longer available. We're seeing these trends with kids. Like, give me data, but also tell me stories and tell me how people's lives can be changed and bring me along a story arc. And don't expect me to give you, I always say, it's a bit like sales. The first gift is the smallest gift, right? Sometimes there's that fine, I'll give you some money to go away gift. But it's small, slow yeses and fast no's, versus fast no's.
Well, and it is like sales. When you think about people they don't want to be sold. They have a problem that they need to solve. They have a need they're looking to fill. There's a reason why they would buy something, and it's not just to convince you or have you go away and say, here, let me give you some money. I'll buy your thing. And then they regret it later. Who wants that? Then you might get a transaction, but you'll get a user, but you won't get a customer. You won't get long-term client value in that. Yep. And so this is so good. So Jenny, tell us a little bit more about like what you do. So we've talked about your book. You mentioned about you also coach. Obviously you have expertise in fundraising. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and the clients that you work with.
Well, thank you for this platform, because I sort of listen to you list off those things. I'm like, God, I've done a lot of variety of things, but there is a thread, Nicole. So the thread is meaningful connections. The thread is conversations that matter. And so I can trace that thread through all of my work. And where I've landed is supporting and elevating women's voices. What I talk about is helping number twos become number ones in work and life. So I'm no longer interested in just work coaching. I really want to be full body coaching. I want to, in the sense that I don't think you can, I haven't met anybody yet who is one person at work and one person at home. Right. And so all of the pieces that I've been adding to my toolkit, be it breath work, be it vestibular system work, be it, positive affirmations. I mean, I am a huge book reader. I love all that stuff. And what I'd like to do is help those number twos become who they want to be. Mm-hmm. And the way that is through coaching. It's been my best experience. So I work one-on-one with folks. Most of my folks come from corporate. That tends to be my thread. And then I also work in group programs. So I have a program called The Penthouse, which is for aspiring women leaders, where we have 12 months together where we go through self, others, team, and vision. Those are sort of my 4 big buckets. And we co-create that space together. So just like at the podcast where I immediately flipped it to you, I hate talking heads. I want to be in dialogue and conversation with people. And so the mastermind framework really works well. Whereas I introduce topics, I absolutely facilitate and I guide. But I actually believe very strongly in the tenet of executive coaching, or any coaching, is that the coachee comes already whole. We're not here to people, right? We're here to elevate, ask good questions, challenge, inspire, to provoke a new lens, a new sense of awareness, a new perspective, because when your perspective changes, the world around you changes with it. Yeah. And that, I think, is probably the most profound and powerful thing I could do with my life.
Yeah. I love that. And when you talk about number twos becoming number ones, as we wrap up here, what is, if there is obviously going to your website, learning more about your programs and participating in your next program that you've got launching, the mastermind for the 12 months. What is one thing that if a number two has been kind of in line of succession and maybe delayed, when they feel like, I don't know how to get from here to there, what is the one thing that you would say for them, just a starting point to set themselves up to be that number one?
Love the question. Deep breath. Ask for genuine feedback. And what I often find is that, unfortunately, number twos are pigeonholed because they do such a good job that the number one doesn't really want them to move anywhere.
Right.
So that's one of the experiences you have, right? The other thing I often say is please never put yourself in a position where you put your career in somebody else's hands. And I see a lot of that in the world where people say, well, my number one will take care of me. So what I mean by feedback is going to your direct report and saying, in the pursuit of my learning, I've identified some areas. So people don't like, can you give me feedback blank, right? It doesn't work. I've identified some specific areas that I would like to work on in my growth. And you may have made some notes I always find four lines, 4 questions. And I'd like to take the time with you to kind of unpack some of those things. Would that be something you would be willing to do at our next one-on-one? Now, do you hear that? The permission-based, would that be something? So asking permission, first of all. And when we get into that meeting, some folks, you have to know your boss. Do they like to have things in advance? Do they like to speak off the cuff? One of the things I've found is if you can ask them to ask for a scale. So some people are very uncomfortable receiving or giving feedback. So if you say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I communicate most effectively with you and timely, where would you put me? I find that really cuts to the chase, Nicole, as far as like getting people to answer.
Yeah.
And then that's part A, but part B is going to not a direct report, but somebody who's on that same line and seeking feedback, not asking them to be a mentor or a sponsor, but what's your perception of me? And could you please be as clear and as constructive as possible for me? Because I think most people are quite taken aback by that. And it really changes the energetic dynamic. I've been waiting around. I've been sitting in my seat, waiting for someone to anoint me versus going after it in a very respectful, not necessarily, this isn't an aggressive move. And if you want to, you can even let your boss know that you're doing it. Yeah. You'd be amazed how it changes energy when you take responsibility for your own career, how people see you differently. I have seen this time and time again, the internal processing to make the decision to take coaching or to take yourself seriously. Suddenly the playing field changes. The chair changes, Nicole, if you will.
Yes. Oh, I love that, because that is about personal leadership. That is about demonstrating it. And it takes courage. It takes awareness. It takes courage to be willing to even receive that feedback. What are you going to do with that feedback once you get it? Yeah. That is so good. Such great advice. Jenny, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man. It went in directions that I didn't expect it to go. It was like, that's why I love these conversations where it's like, you just open to the possibility. And it's been so good. We're going to make sure, of course, your book, a link to your book, Embracing Ambition, and your podcast, Underdog Leadership, and your website, chavender.com, is all in the show notes. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I guess I would say that you know what you are looking for. Just sometimes you have to get quiet, you have to get thoughtful, and you have to get brave to find out what you really think, because you know what's best for you. I know you do. Yeah.
That's so good. When you were talking about number 2s and number 1s and how valuable number 2s are, even as we categorize number 1, number 2, I was thinking about the fact that sometimes we think our value is only in a position of being in number 1, then I'm valuable.
Yeah.
But maybe it's realizing, to what you were just saying, is maybe realizing that this is the best position. This is where I thrive. Yeah. So often, like I see that in sales, where somebody's a really good salesperson and then they promote them into management and they fail miserably. Why? Because that's a totally different set of skills. Yeah. And so, in knowing what you really want, don't don't chase that number 1 position because you think that's what you need to do, because that's what everybody else assumes is the next role for you. Yeah. You might be in number 2 and you might love it. I know there's some people who are entrepreneurs. I believe we're all entrepreneurs at heart, but some are more adept to being intrapreneurs, working within companies, working within systems. I think of somebody, amazing, talented woman. She's a rock star. And she said, you know what? I think I realize in myself that I like working within a system, a structure, a team that's already established, and then I can shine there. And so to your point about just know who you are, know what you really want. You deep inside know that, and don't let anybody tell you that you need to do something other than that. Just stay, take the feedback,
Totally.
but trust your instincts. So yeah, so good. Thank you.
I'm looking at your sign behind you that says loved enough, and it's that idea that you start the day, you're already enough, right?
Yes.
Because I think even with this number 2 and number 1, we can imply through those labels that people are less than. And in my experience, the more you show up with your cup already full, and that you can fill your own cup, which is something I'm still working on, Nicole. I mean, I think we're all a work in progress. It gets easier as you get older. But that knowing of how you can take care of yourself, that you are already enough, and that the day at work is a bonus.
Yes.
Which finishes and then it starts all over again. None of this sort of collapse into a heap at 5 o'clock anymore, please. Like, life is too short and too valuable for that. Let's embrace ambition. I love how I did that. Let's embrace ambition every day and come from a place of fullness, I guess is the word, or abundance is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So good. All right. Well, I always say leaders of transformation take action. So for everyone who's listening out there, watching, take action on something that you heard today. Maybe it's spending that quiet time, getting still, and spending 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, or even 15 minutes, just taking a little bit of time to just step aside, step out of the busyness, and to check in with yourself and to say, okay, what are the next steps that I need to take? What do I truly desire? And then what are the next steps to go forward from there? I encourage you, maybe it's re-listening to this, grabbing the nuggets, get the book, listen to, her podcast, Jenny's podcast, go to her website, explore this a little bit further, because you know what? You can listen to podcasts every day. You can read books, you can do all these things, but it's when we take action and apply what we learned, that's when transformation happens. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, reach out to us there. Of course, we're on social as well. And we'd love to hear how this has impacted you and what you do with it. So with that, thanks for being here today. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation. Have a great day.